in addition to the bill in Georgia stopping people from being able to hand out water and all that, we know that most of the components will result in longer lines, making it harder to vote, making so some people will drop out or not even sign up in future elections to vote. Now, is that an issue? Seems like if you want people to vote, it'd be an issue, but right-wing pundit Ben Shapiro doesn't agree, and he has an interesting analogy to make.
Jim Crow explicitly created a separate system of law for Black Americans and treated them as inferior. There's nothing in the law like that. That's not only an overstatement, it's just an outright lie. But, says Jamel Hill, all of corporate America should resonate to the lie. The law imposes new voter identification requirements for absentee ballots. Well, clearly that's racist. I mean, you mean you have to show that you are who you say you are when you vote absentee? If you can explain to me how that's racist, I'm willing to hear it. Anyone? Bueller? It limits the use of ballot drop boxes. Oh, you mean like ballot drop boxes where people could just stuff the ballot box or take ballots out of the ballot box? It hands state officials more power over local elections. Even before the legislation passed, many voters of color in Georgia faced hours-long queues at the polls. By the way, voter suppression doesn't involve long lines, any more than long lines at Disneyland are ride suppression. You know what voter suppression is? Voter suppression is where you don't get to vote. Making those waits even more arduous, the new law bans giving food and water to people in line to vote. That's not even true. It bans giving any gift to people in line when they are within 150 feet of the polling place. You can bring water with you. There are people outside who can give you water. This is just not true.
Okay, so he is lying there, but also really fast, Marissa, I have asked you in the past to not raise the pitch of his voice artificially. I think it's messed up that you continue to do that. It's making him look ridiculous. So if you could stop that. Anyway, Charles, so his analogy to ride suppression at Disneyland, we should take it seriously because in a lot of high profile write-ups and things like the New York Times. No, he's been, Charles, he's been referred to as an intellectual gladiator. So I'm probably too dumb to understand the analogy, but what do you think about it?
I think that Ben Shapiro probably knows a lot more than about Disneyland than I do at my age. But given that, so I'm going to yield to him as the expert about Disneyland lines. But what I will say is that I think, he is doing what he is doing in order to feed that machine. His logic is obviously misplaced and does not follow on a number of levels. And it lacks context and balance. I mean, at the end of the day, we talked about the fact that if you look at the law in a complete vacuum, of course, there are a lot of provisions that seem to be fine. I don't know that Ben Shapiro has actually ever seen or used a ballot box in order to talk about people being able to take votes out of them. I don't think he really understands how those work. But even still, what he is saying, again, raises the question of why. Right, like even if I accept all of the absurdities of what he's talking about, even if I give credence to every argument that he's made, my question is, why are you solving for a problem that you don't have evidence of existing? Like you're going through extensive measures to address an issue that we do not have concrete evidence of having been a problem. And so the question there is why? Like explain that, like explain why. And then if that's the case, why now? Right? Like, did you just somehow think that all of a sudden we need to really shore up these potential security threats to our electoral process? Like now is the first time you thought of that? Really? Right? Yep. So because of all of these things, I can't take Ben Shapiro seriously. And then with Marissa raising his voice and speeding him up so that he actually sounds like Mickey Mouse, there's no way I can take him seriously. Like that's just not happening. So, I mean,
Well, and
that's all I have to say on that one. So that's all I got, John. All I got on Ben Shapiro.
Now look, my last point on this is their audience, the Fox and Friends audience, the Ben Shapiro audience, are not like analyzing his analogy. They like the idea of Black people not voting as much as Ben Shapiro and Brian Kemp do. They're down for all of this. I would just point out though, that if you are going to go up there and say, how dare those other people be bothered by long lines? I think we get to speculate about what the longest voting line is that they've ever waited in. Has Ben Shapiro ever waited longer than 32 minutes to vote? Kilmeade, Ainsley Earhart, have they ever waited 4 hours to vote? I don't think so. I never have. I voted in Connecticut, Texas, and California. I've never waited more than 30 minutes. And sometimes I just walk in and that's it.
I think, John, all jokes aside, we talk about context and what you are saying from a practical standpoint is exactly what we are talking about in terms of how context plays out and why it matters. For people who are not clear about what John and I are talking about, let's make some things clear. There are voting sites and voting places within the state of Georgia that disproportionately had fewer polling stations either open or available, or voting machines available for the amount of population that these areas had. And this was known. And this was understood, right? And so that is going to make the lines longer. You have a denser, more densely populated area, and yet you have fewer voting machines, or you have just as many voting machines as an area that literally has a fraction of that. So from a conceptual place, it's important to remember that you cannot compare your experience as a voter when you just walk into a space and you're able to vote and you're in and out within 20 minutes as to another area that has significantly fewer resources allocated to them in terms of voting machines and voting booths and things of that nature, but has a population that is like twice as much as where you live, or 3 times as much as where you live. That is where we're talking about. So the idea that, oh my gosh, they have to wait in line. There were people who I know in the state of Georgia, and I have family who lives in Georgia, who literally waited hours. Not 1 hour, not 2 hours, going on 3 hours to vote. A 30-second process, a minute and a half process, right? You get your ballot, you go in, you do your thing. This is a process that takes, 2 minutes if you have a sense of what you're doing and know what you're doing, but it's not an extensive process. And yet and still, there were people waiting in line for hours, right? Sure. Like, I think that's what people have to understand, that all voting sites are not created equal from a waiting standpoint. So it is indeed a function of privilege when people are laughing about the amount of time that people are waiting in line for stuff, because it matters and it makes a difference.
Yeah. Especially when, as you pointed out, it's almost universally a bunch of conservative white people laughing about people in Georgia having to wait in line. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.